Hey you. Yes, you. Why don't I know how I feel about you? Oh, hey everyone. Sorry, it's just me having a romantic comedy moment with a game that I've been trying to review for a while. I am glad I took some time to actually fully process how I feel about this game, but honestly, I'm not sure if I want to chase it to the airport, stop it from getting on the plane and telling how I feel about it, or if I just feel like letting it slowly succumb to hypothermia while I'm safe and warm on a piece of the Titanic. As I'm sure you guys can already tell, I'm really confused about this one. I actually love part of the game, and some of it has been really impressive. And how could it not? It comes from essentially the father of Final Fantasy. He's been doing some amazing games over at Mistwalker for quite a while. Lost Odyssey being like one of my low-key favorite unknown JRPGs. To top it all off, he got the inspiration to make this game while he was playing Final Fantasy VI on stream. So that whole formula should make an incredibly good game. So why am I so torn on it? Well, let's take a look at the good, the bad, and see where we rate this game. But before we do that, please hit that like and subscribe button. Help the channel grow. Getting to 2,000 subs would be amazing, and let's try to do that before the summer. Do that. Maybe. Probably not. Anyway, let's get on to Fantasian Neo Dimension, which, by the way, is the name of the game. If I hadn't mentioned it, you could have seen it already when I was talking about it. Anyway, so this game has been released for a while, and it came out on Apple Arcade, so that's why only 3 people have ever played it. Not many people had access to it or really knew it existed. So Fantasian Neo Dimension, as I said, is basically the creation of the father of Final Fantasy, retro Final Fantasy. And the first thing that was a little bit of a shocker to me was some of my favorite Final Fantasies, like 6 and 4, they were really great on combat, but even better on story. And my issue with Fantasian is, honestly, it's not a great story. In fact, it's so traditional, it's almost generic. One of the main key points in the very beginning is the fact that you're taking on as a main character called Leo, and Leo has, guess what, amnesia. I swear, if amnesia didn't exist, RPGs, JRPGs, and soap operas just would cease to exist as well. It's like their favorite thing to point to. But anyway, you start off as Leo, and yes, he has amnesia, and it happens at a very weird time because it just so happens he's in the middle of some sort of, I'm gonna say, errorist event, it seems like anyway. I don't know if you can say the full words on YouTube, I'm being nice. But it seems you're trying to cause massive damage to some sort of factory or some gigantic warehouse or building. And in this, they're basically teaching you the tutorial how to play the game. And when it seems like all is lost and you're at the end, you actually just kind of portal hop. You pop into a dimension and you wake up at this new world. It looks completely different from where you just came from. Where you came from was incredibly futuristic. This looks old world, if you will. But surprisingly, the people here, or at least a good chunk of them, know who you are. And so you're advised to go see a doctor, where you actually meet his daughter. And in a crazy turn of events, you end up summoning some sort of god who ends up killing the doctor and ends up leaving you with more questions than answers. But now you have a partner, as you and the daughter decide you're going to travel together and find out who and why was attacking her father and killed him, and she decided to travel with you as well to help find your memories. Another big sticking point of the story is actually how there's like this mechanical virus that literally will take over like a town. Like it's incredibly powerful and it spreads really fast. And I'm gonna be honest, I don't really love the story. This is essentially about as deep as it goes, and I don't mean like there's no complexity. There is a bit to it, but it's more so about like the connection between the characters. And honestly, for me, I had a hard time making any connection with these characters, and I just didn't feel like the story was enough to really keep me engaged. There'd be many times in the game that I kind of just forgot what was going on. This happened quite often in the game, as one of the other big issues is pacing. So like in the first 20 hours or so, the game is paced normally, I would say. Relatively well. You're hopping from town to town, you're meeting new characters, the story's kind of growing, but then the second part, and this is because it did come on Apple Arcade and they released it episodically, or at least in halves, the second part is like 40 hours of incredibly slow, weird pacing. You're jumping back into places you've already been, You're still sort of meeting new characters, but a lot of that is more about like grouping your team together. And there's some areas that you just can't really get to, or if you can, you're under leveled. I'll get into this more in a second, but you also can't really grind. There's a penalty for over grinding. So it's things like this that actually really wear on a already flimsy story. But at that same point, the counter argument would be the game looks incredibly great. There's over 160 set pieces that were handcrafted. They took pictures of from different angles, and that sort of painstaking work has really given this game a look of the environment like I've never seen before. Like at times it's incredibly crystal clear and just looks insanely cool. Other times I will say it does look a little blurry and kind of crappy, but that only happens on close-ups in scenes. It's kind of weird how it happens, but you can definitely notice it when you see it. It's not a big issue because the rest of the game just look wonderful. The only issue I have with some of it though is the controls. Your character will kind of just take some weird turns or some angles when the camera changes. It's a very weird experience and it happens quite a bit in the game. It's annoying at first, but you get used to it after a while. And while I wish that they would have taken the time with the characters that they did with the environment, the same thing has to be said for the combat. The combat is actually really good. You can tell like this was the main focal point of the game, and their whole system was to make an incredibly difficult turn-based RPG. In fact, one of the big upgrades of the port, the Neo Dimension part of it, was actually offering a normal mode because it was just too difficult. Too many people complained that it was almost impossible. And they sort of do this in multiple ways. One of the things that they notably do is penalize you for over-leveling. Meaning, if you get to a point where the enemies are below you so much, you gain almost no experience. So it's almost pointless to grind. You'll also notice that a lot of the stuff isn't unlocked for quite a long time. One of the big important things for me was like the skill tree. The skill tree isn't unlockable until 20 hours in or so. Like, it's a long time before that's available. And even once it is, it doesn't really offer a boon. It doesn't offer much of a difference in the skills that you've already unlocked. This also really makes the game's pacing seem even worse because, again, this is after like that 20-hour mark. And it seems like there's almost no growth. The actual combat itself, like I said, is great. In fact, kind of difficult. Relies on a lot of strategy, and there is many strategies that you can use. But one of the biggest things that it does is it bases itself on mechanics or gimmicks. Many people might know this, especially from MMOs, which is interesting because a lot of people said, oh, this was like if Final Fantasy didn't go the MMO route, yet their bosses in this game are completely MMO based, meaning they have some sort of mechanic that you have to figure out. Most likely, you're gonna die, and then you'll figure it out. You might die a couple times, and then you'll figure it out. But the most punishing thing about it is the fact that these boss fights can last 25 minutes to an hour. So you could be almost an hour into a boss fight and then die, and you're gonna have to redo it again. You're gonna have to then figure out a better strategy to beat the game, or to beat the boss, I should say. But this actually happens, well, all through the entire game, and at times, I feel like it's incredibly rewarding and cool, but other times it just gets to be incredibly tedious, and that's my issue with the game in general. At times, there are things that are incredibly innovative about the game, things that you don't really come across very often. The combat, for instance, the way that you can actually bend your attacks and your attack patterns to attack different people. One of the other things is actually your ability to take random battles and hold them off to the end. You can basically send them off to a dimension where you can build up to like 30 enemies will sit there, and once that fills up, that dimension fills up, then you can fight them all at the same time. You can actually grow that up to like 50 enemies. Now, towards the end of the game, it doesn't really seem to matter, and that fills up incredibly quick, but it's also a cool idea for those people who just get annoyed by the random attacks. I get you. You're trying to explore an area, and every 2 seconds it feels like you're getting into a random battle. It's super annoying. So this was a cool way that they dealt with that. And again, just like going over and crushing like 30 enemies at once is pretty fun. Although towards the middle and the last part of the game, this becomes incredibly tedious because, again, these encounters will last quite a while and you don't get very much XP from it. So it just seems to be this giant time sink. And so much of the combat, which again is at its core really good, is almost boring in a way, just because of how long it lasts and how tedious it tends to be. as well as the rest of the game in many ways. Even the story, having to backtrack so often, not exactly knowing where to go or being under leveled for some areas, and having to kind of figure out that aspect of it is also incredibly tedious as well. But I don't know. I'm really not sure where I sit with this game. I had a lot of fun with it. It's one of those games that I played for a while and I didn't even realize time went by, like literally like 4 hours. Sitting down, that's when I first started playing it. I sat down with it at midnight and it was like 4 a.m. before I realized that it was that late. So I've had one of those moments with the game. I've also fell asleep while playing this game twice. Twice I fell asleep. Think about that. Like one time, okay, that's probably on me, but if a game puts you to sleep twice, that's on the game. Ultimately, I would say that if you love old school RPGs, if you love turn-based RPGs, if you're looking for a challenge, this is probably a game you're going to enjoy to an extent. One of my tips for playing a game, though, is just play this game. This is one of those games that if you kind of hop between games, you'll probably get lost, and it will become infuriating at times. I know because that happened to me multiple times. Anyway, if I was going to give this game a score, I would probably give it a 7.5 out of 10. It was really good when it's really good. It's also infuriating when it's infuriating. I hope that makes sense, but that's my thoughts on Fantasian Neo Dimension. If you guys have played this game, please let me know in the comment section. Let me know what games you're playing. Actually, just let me know your thoughts in general. I love interacting with you guys, so I appreciate any comments. Anyway, thank you all so much. I love each and every one of you. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.